Wow. Hello, 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 and welcome to PitchZone. What do you do in such a crowded marketplace today to stand out somewhat? Well, one of the things that you can do is be different, and you need to communicate that. And this is going to be the topic of today's show. And I have with me, as almost every week, Nathan Gold. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. All good here in San Francisco Bay Area. Happy to be
Very
on the
good.
pitch zone today.
Great, great, great. Nathan and I, we are both presentation coaches, and we have with us today a very special guest, Guillaume Wiatr. Guillaume, welcome to Pitch Zone.
Good morning. Good morning, the Peach Stone and Nathan and Claudio. It's a pleasure to be here.
I have been waiting with excitement for this particular episode, Guillaume, and then we had a prep call a little bit earlier this week, and my excitement went up even more because you are a person that knows a lot about narratives, about stories, and weaving that and using it to differentiate yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey to even discover this methodology that you have been using so successfully over the last few years.
Claudio, it's a compliment to say that I know a lot about narrative and story. I think that in the last 30 years that I've been studying this field, I only scratched the surface. It's a long life learning journey. And it started, you asked me about the origin, in fact, of the strategic narrative methodology. And it's a great question to start because we're diving right in. The origin story is one of the core elements of the strategic narrative methodology, and maybe we'll talk about this later in this conversation. But it was 2001, and I was early in my career, maybe the first 5 years of my career as a consultant, and I was something happened at a large client, large corporation. I was brought on to fix a technical problem, and the day of the kickoff, I had prepared a very traditional agenda. As a good formatted technical consultant, I come all buttoned up, and I had done some interviews and stakeholder research. And I meet with the head of procurement at that large organization. And he, just to give you a sense of magnitude, he runs a $2 billion purchasing department. And at the time, it's 2001, and they're trying to digitize a lot of their core processes. So go online, because it was the promise of the e-business Eldorado, and they wanted to do that, but they were stuck in their project, and they had identified that I knew a little tiny piece of their process that was really bugging them, because I knew a specific kind of software. And 30 minutes into the meeting, I'm running this meeting, and I realize that's not the problem. My gut tells me, my intuition tells me, we're not tackling the right problem. And why do I say this? Because I see that these people can't communicate with each other. They don't align. They're not on the same page. So I was faced with what I call a why, when the road splits in two, and I had a decision to make. Do I keep going with my agenda and ignore what I feel is true and important, but comply with the promise of my presence here? Or do I decide to change this on a whim without really preparation, right? Do I improvise? And it turns out I'm also a jazz pianist, so I know how to improvise when I need to. And I said, hey guys, do you mind if we stop here and pause, and all grab a piece of paper and draw the project? Everybody drew the project, posted it on the wall, and the drawings did the rest. They showed visually that nobody had the same picture nobody had the same image for the project. And that taught me a very, very important lesson, a critical lesson that started to get me on this journey of understanding how we can be more cohesive and coherent and different when we do something, which is that it's great if you have a good story. Everybody is a good storyteller. But if you have a strong narrative that brings people together, that aligns them more powerfully. Your organization goes way, way, way beyond the normal. So from that day, I started to make a difference between the story and a narrative. I realized that if you work as a more with a more holistic approach, and including not just communication but mindset and decision making and action, and you create meaning and cohesion and coherence in that system of stories that I call the narrative, you can be much better at what you do, much happier. To close on the story, because stories have an end, unlike narratives are open-ended, they continue to go forever. To close on my story, so what happened? It turns out that worked. So I have to tell you, I think I got a little bit lucky. I was I was probably the right person at the right time and the right place, right? That was my luck in my origin story, and I got lucky and it worked. And the project, the team, managed to unlock the project. And 6 months later, the head of procurement came to me and said, "Hey, I just want to share something with you. We worked with two big five firms before you came on, and we had to change because it just couldn't work. They didn't point to this problem the way you did. So I want to thank you for this, because now we're moving forward." So that taught me that an incredible lesson that now gave birth. That's the true origin. So that was 22 years ago. But the true origin of the strategic methodology is this particular story. The strategic narrative methodology helps now professional services firms, CEOs, founders, business leaders of these firms create organizations that are more focused and make more traction. These are the two things that I bring to the table when I work with clients, and I do this through integrating the the three aspects that I covered just earlier: communication, mindset, and behaviors and decision. So that is the overview right there, my friends.
All right, Guillaume, the one thing you said in that story intrigued me, and I'd like to hear more about. How has your jazz pianist skills participated in your journey in business? I'm curious, like, where's the overlap? How has that affected you? Because I don't normally meet that many people who have that kind of combination.
Yeah, that's a great question. It has majorly influenced how I work and how I see the world. If you're familiar with the way we play jazz, we don't have everything's transcribed, or there's no script like in classical music, where every single note and the tempo and even the mood for the music is recommended, at least, or dictated by the composer. Whereas in jazz, all you get is a grid with harmony. And the two principles that have always guided me in jazz are extreme precision, extreme rigor in the structure, in the way you do things, in the way you play, but also extreme freedom. So a possibility to improvise. And that's where things really overlap, Nathan. Jazz is an art that recognizes the genius and the beauty um, of in the momentness. You are a nowist, Nowist, a nowist in jazz. Jazz happens in the moment, and I've always felt like thinking like this could be hugely beneficial to businesses and organizations. More thinking with the resources, the ideas that you have in the moment. So one of the core elements of jazz is listening. You listen first before you play, right? There is an order, there's a structure, and we agree on who's going to play the melody first and who's going to take choruses and so on. So we have a loose agenda, kind of like this conversation today, in fact. But we let it happen because we believe that the now moment is where the source of inspiration and the best outcome can happen. It is how we solve problems. It is how we are more creative. It's how we deliver better value. And I'm still talking about jazz, by the way. The music is more alive, is more tailored to the audience, in fact, because we are now in the moment. So the audience, even though their silence, plays a role when we play live in jazz. So everything, all of those principles, I ported over to how I build the strategic narrative methodology. I could go on and on the whole day about this, Nathan.
Yeah, that's an
Oh,
amazing correlation to
Yeah,
music and the having the freedom to go and wherever it leads you. It sounds to me like our audience just won't all be able to become pianists, but we can all have the same learnings by going to improv. What Guillaume has
absolutely.
just described is improv,
Yes,
but
exactly.
with music.
Improvisation. Thank you for because I think I was beating around the bush a little bit. That's the key word. That's improvisation. And if you think about improvisation, Nathan, what's beautiful is that in improv, there is seldom or barely any mistakes. They are learnings. You learn through improvisation. You don't make a mistake because there was no plan in the first place.
Exactly.
exactly, exactly. Oh, I love how this conversation is already unfolding, and we were just diving in right from the moment on. So let's quickly turn to our viewers online. Because we have a couple of viewers on YouTube right now. We have Anthony from San Francisco. Anthony, I hope you're doing extremely well. We have Rick Pollack joining us from Boston, Massachusetts. Nathan Wright from Woodinville, and the gift tailor Samantha is back as well. Scott Peak, it's a great pleasure to see you. And here is a comment from Nathan about listening is so important to understanding. And to me, the two most important things you said is to be in the moment and listen, right? To
Mm.
really just forget anything around you and be in that moment. Rick also is a jazz musician, and his comment here, jazz improvisation skills helped you in the meeting you talked about earlier, Guillaume. You were able to go with the flow and change the agenda. Very cool. Now, when we are thinking about narratives, Guillaume, in your world, what makes a good narrative?
Can I use an image?
Of
Because
course.
I think pictures will speak 1,000 words. And I'll prepare here to share my screen, but just as an intro, just to tee up my answer, I'd like to make sure that we talk about the same thing. In my world, at least in my world, narratives, as I said before, are different than stories. And I know we all, in the business world, we all use those two terms interchangeably. In fact, this is my case a few years ago when in an article I was looking for synonyms and I was saying, story and narrative, and then I paused. But to me, these are two different concepts. And it's important. And it's okay not to make that difference. I'm not here to evangelize and transform how you think. I'm just here to maybe open up for an opportunity to think differently. And stories are, if you will, they're units of a bigger systems that I call a narrative. If you think about it, a story is a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when you watch a movie, read a book, or listen to a colleague, or listen to a pitch, because we're in the pitch zone, there should be a strong ending. There should be a strong closing. A story is something that happened to someone at some point. And as a company, we want to have what we say a great story. But the problem is that we don't realize we don't have a story. We have thousands of stories. And the bigger question is, how do we orchestrate? How do we build this cohesive system of stories? So let me share my screen here. You're showing it actually already, Claudio. Is that right? Yes, you are. Okay, so on the left here, you have what I started noticing back in 2001. There's a whole bunch of pieces that tells different stories. You've got your website that is more about typically marketing and sales. Your vision and mission is more the story of the direction of the company, and then maybe the sales deck that your sales team or yourself is using is slightly different. And the problem is that when you work, at least when you work as a team, it's and even when you're on your own, it can create this chaos and this the spaghetti bowl. I see a spaghetti bowl here. When I designed this graphic, I'm like, oh, this is like a spaghetti bowl, spaghetti in a bowl. And so what a narrative, if you think in terms of narrative, is what you see on the right side of the screen here. A narrative bring coherence to all of those stories, so that when people see your brand or decide to work with you or invest in your idea or join you as a business partner, they feel reassured, they feel clear, they feel more excited to come on board with a company that has a compass. See how I designed this diagram on the right here is just like a compass. There are 4 areas. And by the way, that's why I call my company the MetaHelm, is because this compass should be what guides your leadership decisions, not just your marketing or communication, but also your inner choices, how you go about critical and crucial conversations. So that's what a perfect narrative should feel like and look like. You should be able to draw it and represent it on a piece of paper. This is an exercise that I do with my clients. Of course, here, this is page 50. I think it's page 56 in my ebook. You can download for free on my website. That page is very popular with my readers because it gives them something to shoot for. This is a perfect diagram. Will it ever be perfect? No, of course. But of course, no. I'm not gonna lie. But it gives you a direction and a sense for what your narrative should feel and look like. So very practically, Claudio and Nathan, what do? If you are fundraising, say you're currently, it's September. It's typically a very intense fundraising period of the year. There's more conferences. You're meeting people. Well, make sure that your investor speech has the same key big idea as your business strategy. And maybe you want to realign with your team first and say, hey, this is what we're going to tell the outside world that we do and why we do it. Are we on board with this? Do you feel like if we saw this promise, you guys would still be excited about working here? These are the conversations that we never pay attention to because we have excuses, because we don't have time, or because it goes too fast, or we overlook this, or also we're so close to what we do that we don't have the hindsight to look at this. So this is what a good narrative looks like. And I made up this theory. Of course, that's the pattern that I've been observing for more than 30 years now. And so what I did, because I wanted to check on this, is that I took a set of 20 different organizations and companies. Some of them are most known than others. And I ran them through this model and could always see this pattern. There is always an internal side of the company that is coherently operating with the outside perspective of the company. You could see this very, very, very strongly. And that's what good leaders do. They always pay attention to those facets. Voila. That is what a good narrative should look like. That is what it should feel like. So if you don't have something like that, start assembling the pieces and all the stories about your company, and gather them and see what's in there and connect them together.
So Guillaume, who handles all of this within the company? Is there one person that brings all this narrative together, and then getting alignment and all of that sounds like a pretty big deal. Do you have any templates that people can use when they're doing this rat's nest over to this beautiful compass analogy that you have used there? I do very much like that compass analogy myself, being a Boy Scout.
well, it's the job of somebody who has had the helm of the company. Remember, this is the MetaHelm. So typically, it will be the CEO and the leadership team of the company. If you're a company of one, it is your responsibility. I would not recommend delegating this to an agency who probably is great at looking at the outside part of their organization, or maybe doing some interviews, but they are not in your shoes every day. This is something that is your responsibility. And if you are a busy CEO and you don't feel like you have all the time necessary to coordinate and connect all the dots, create a small team. And it doesn't have to be high up in the hierarchy. It could be people who really see also this problem and are interested in fixing it. So I work with teams on these problems, and I set them on the label for what we do. The work that we do is called Team on a Mission. Like we really look at all the facets of the organization, and we work as a team on these things. Again, that's connecting to my origin story, helping this team 22 years ago figure out why the project was stuck. And you asked
So
me
I'm
also if I
curious.
right?
Say
There was
again?
2 questions. There was 2 questions in your question. I think there's also what's the template.
Yes. Do you have any templates that our audience might be able to learn from
Yeah.
or use in their businesses?
So I don't have one template. It's a question that I get very often, and people go, "What's the template? How do?" Because behind template, people think sometimes, "Oh, I just have to fill out the Mad Lib and the words." And so here is how to approach this at the basic level. This is maybe the starting point. This is my framework. It's a model, and there are 4 areas you can work on. Remember, I told you it's a system of stories. So there are 4 major stories that you should pay attention to, and you can see them on screen. So you can read, but I'll just go quickly over the order in which you should start with them. So a great exercise to do is to explore your origin story. Notice I said explore. I didn't say craft. Notice I say explore because of course you're going to want to write it and document it. Sometimes I do this using graphics. I'm a graphic facilitator, so I use drawings, live drawing, and we document where the company comes from, what started. It's always fascinating to see that people forget the key moment, the decisive triggering instance and moments that originated the company. So the origin story is the first one in the framework. And then you have the opportunity story, which is a lot more about outside. Where is this company wanting to go? What is the impact that you would like to create outside in the world that will make the world, a better place, if you will? And then, third story here on your left is the perspective story. Like, okay, what are the rules, the guiding principles with which we will operate? And then lastly, and most importantly, is the product story. Like concretely, like as a customer, as a client, what are you asking me, or what are you recommending that I do? Right? Oh, well, here's a service, here's a product, here's a package, here's a program, here is maybe the palette is very, very big. Here's a new technology that can accelerate your journey to the opportunity that I described here. So I have a whole course on this, and people again can check it out, and free videos also on YouTube, because that, again, I want to make this accessible to everyone.
Okay.
Very good, very good. Guillaume, you were mentioning the origin story, and Nathan and I, we work with a lot of founders together, and this is one of the areas where I always have to smile a bit, chuckle that so many entrepreneurs, right? They are just skipping over the origin story, or it is so deep inside them that they just maybe think it's not interesting for others to listen to. What kind of questions, or how do you approach an entrepreneur to really explore that deep, deep rooted spark that led to the formation of the company?
Well, one of the patterns that I often see is the confusion between your origin story and your history. And when I ask someone, or when I start this exercise, say, hey, tell me your origin story, 9 times out of 10, I get a long multi-pages document that tells me all the chronological things that happened to this person or the company. It's a great place to start. It's only a place to start. The key tip that I give is keep exploring, because this is all the material we have to work with. But now let's take a look at these and try to filter them through the lens of which of these events, which of these moments or anecdotes or people you met really could tie to what you do today. That's another thing I see is the connection with what you do today, and why, and how do they explain why you would do today in a way that that really makes people excited to go find out more, if you will. Notice that when I told my origin story, I picked a very specific meeting, 2001. I could almost tell you the time. I could go back there. I know the place and I can remember the people. So there is very vivid emotional depiction of what happened there. Do I need to tell all the details every time? Probably not. I boiled it down to one single quick line. Once I was in a meeting that I had set and I derailed my own agenda to find out that a team to operate at its best needs a narrative, not just a story. See, that's my log line, if you will. So these are the tips that I always like to focus on. As I'll summarize here. Number one, don't get confused between your history and your origin story. Number two, make sure that it connects with why your company is relevant now. And number three, be ready to make it super short or be able to talk about it for an hour. The accordion, make it an accordion. Oh, again, a music metaphor here.
Metaphors are great things to use. I'm a big believer in them myself. So, Guillaume, I have a really struggling in my mind here with this story versus narrative. I love that distinction so much that I think I'm going to have to spend the next few days kind of assimilating that. But what I'm curious about is whenever we are out there working with companies, helping them come up with a way to describe their origin story or their product story or any of those four brackets that you had before. But I'm curious, like, how do you get people aligned? Like, how do you get alignment within an organization? Because honestly, there's usually one or two people we're working with, and I know your business is different, but storytelling is a bit of art and science. And yeah, defining the stories and defining the narratives are wonderful. And I think that's probably one of the missing links in many companies. But talk to us about, how do you get alignment? How do you get everybody on the same track, telling stories and sharing narratives in a way that is genuine, honest, and them, versus having to parrot what somebody else upstairs is telling them to say?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll stick to my principles, and I'll since you asked me to explore the overlap with music earlier, I'm just gonna use the same. You don't get alignment in a jazz group like a trio by rehearsing or just playing once. You have to have a cadence. You have to meet at a frequent and repeated cadence, right? You rehearse so that you have the possibility to create a common language. Language creation doesn't happen overnight, and that's something that many leaders, business leaders, sometimes want to skip. They think, oh, great, we're going to publish this vision, the strategy document, have this great town hall, communicate it once, and we're done. Because if people are confused, well, it's on the website, on the intranet. It's if such a thing still exists. It's on the website. It's everywhere. So just read, right? This is not how you create alignment. You create alignment by slowly but surely making sure that people have time to integrate what the company means for them. It doesn't have to be perfect alignment. In fact, perfect alignment never exists. Thank God, because otherwise we would be all machines and robots. We need divergence. We need creative moments where we disagree to maybe later find a common ground that actually feels right, where we settle and we say, yeah, you're right. You were right. I agree. But I still believe this, but let's move forward. Let's try it. Let's see how it works. But this can only happen if you meet at regular and frequent intervals. It could be online, it could be in person, it could be, there's so many methods of communications, but where I think that most organizations fall short is in creating that joyful discipline, because it shouldn't be a chore. It should should be a moment that people, enjoy participating in, feel safe about raising their hands. So if your leadership style is very much command and control and, dictating things, in our era, it might work. It might work, but you're going to run into challenges when it comes to creating agility in your organization. So that's another debate. Now we're morphing towards creating organizations, but really, to me, Nathan, it's really that foundational zone, that foundational principle. I call it the backbone. Many of us in business have a wishbone. We wish our company was doing this. We wish our journey was doing. We wish as a leader, as an entrepreneur, we would become this person. But then we don't have a backbone. We don't have a plan for it, right? And that's when a methodology like this one can really help you. You can visualize where the plan should happen and orchestrate it and schedule it. That's how you create alignment, in my opinion and my experience, Nathan.
Brilliant.
Nice, nice, nice. The gift tailor, Samantha, had a comment which I
Yeah.
think is also a bit of a question in there. I need to try getting origin story to a one-liner. What do you do? How do you work with clients that have a firm grasp of their origin story, but they ramble on a little bit, or it's a little bit too long? How do you guide them to something more succinct?
I believe in the power of gentle pressure. And so what I recommend is that we come up with a minimally viable version. So something that is not perfect, maybe we'll change it, and we agree. And there's maybe a little bit of actually not a little bit. We need to work on the mindset to be able to do this, but it's a prototyping exercise. And then I like to recommend that my clients schedule 5 coffee conversations with people they would be safe sharing this origin story with, to start with, because sometimes the origin story has connections with trauma or emotional burden or struggle. So we want to be gentle and careful with this. But I recommend that people schedule 5 talks to experiment and test and see, how easy it was to explain it. What was the response? So you never know if your origin story is the right one until, your audience is actually responding to you. Like, oh my gosh, this is really clear, really inspiring. I understand why now you do what you do. Now that I see where you come from. So, you can only make assumptions, and that's the core and the crux of strategy work. We're making strategy hypotheses in our meetings, and then we go test them as quickly as possible. So keep that in mind. This approach that I'm explaining to you today is really, really, once again, based on the theory that you can know just so much, but then reality and the market commands and dictates, how you're going to be able to be successful.
Very nice. Now, before, you also mentioned that language doesn't happen overnight. ChatGPT and tools like it have changed that a little bit, right? How much are you using these kind of tools, and how are you using them with your clients to come up with more refined narratives? What do you do? How do you do it?
Well, yeah, I like that your question is not if. Your question, Claudio, was not are you using, is how are you using? And I like that because my opinion is that it's inevitable. I use ChatGPT every day and all the time, but I don't use it to replace me. I use it to empower and accelerate my creative process. English is not my native language. However, I'm based in Seattle in the United States. I operate mostly in English with everyone. I also work in Europe, sometimes work in French and a little bit of German. But I use really ChatGPT to challenge my ideas, suggest new ways to express things. And sometimes on accident, the machine will come up with something that I go, yeah, I really didn't think about it this way. Let me let me play with that idea, manually. Like, let me test it, without you, and then I'll get back to ChatGPT and see how I can refine it. So I use ChatGPT to come up with better synonyms, expand or contract statements. I ask it to create lists, bullet points, all sorts of things. I should probably publish my own list of ChatGPT commands. But it's a tool that is integral to how we work with a strategic narrative, and has greatly accelerated and improved the quality of the outcomes. That is for the communication layer of the methodology of the approach here. But remember, a narrative is not just what you say, it's how you think, your mindset, and then ultimately what you do. And there is no, I'm sorry, there is no chat GPT for these two. Your
Yes.
mindset is your own. No machine could replace it. Although ChatGPT will try to suggest, if I mean, you could do mindset work with and reframe and change the way you look at things. It will suggest things, but it's at a very, I think, surface level, mental level. If you really want to integrate this in your body at a cellular level and really make your mindset automated, it's going to have to be you. You're going to have to work maybe with a coach or a colleague, or it's going to be through interactions and practicing different things. And same for action. ChatGPT is just on your screen for now. It's not going to make the decisions that you need to make. And again, this is a big part of changing your narrative.
And what Samantha said earlier about she was trying to get her origin story into one line.
Yeah.
Guillaume just told you the way to do it is just write out your origin story, put it into GPT, and say, make a log line out of this. Done.
Exactly.
Try again.
Exactly.
Try again. Try again. So, Guillaume, I want to make the distinction for our audience here that the way you test your assumptions in these stories and narratives is no different than what they teach in lean startup methodology. You take your assumptions, you validate them. And I've been telling people since I learned about lean startup, it's not only for developing software and hardware, for messages, for sales comp plans, for literally anything. So I'm so happy that you brought that up. That was really fun. And that ChatGPT is another way to quicken your access to those stories, because you can take the story that you would tell, throw it in there, and ask GPT to make it more persuasive, more empathetic, and all those kind of fun things. So thank you for sharing that to us. Now, before we wrap this up, I need to ask you a question about what are some of the common mistakes that people make when it comes to trying to create their narratives or stories with you or without you. Can you share a couple, maybe one or two really interesting stories about what can happen if you don't have a good narrative or a good origin story?
Yeah, I'll start with the latter part of the later part of the question here. What can happen? You'll notice that at two levels. Outside, it's going to be difficult to really connect authentically with people, with your market, your clients. Because I work mostly with professional services firms and technology firms as well. But you'll notice that you're going to have to put way more effort. So the mistake that I see, the symptom that I see, is very low efficiency, a very low return in the time, money spent for initiatives, marketing. Like the example of the very first story I shared with this project. Lots of money. At the time, it was 20 million euros, which was really a big sum for that area. Lots of money spent, very little return in the way we find our product market fit. Internally, what we're going to find is difficulty to, same thing, operate in an agile fashion and pivot quickly. Building a narrative is the mistake that I see is that people are really too focused on the tangible pieces. Like they think it's your logo, they think it's your website, they think it's just one slide deck that will magically transform the market. And to me, this is a very narrow-minded view of that. So a narrative is much more intangible, and I know it can be scary sometimes or a little bit difficult to grasp, but you can see and read a story and you will feel a narrative. You can also see it, but you will also feel it. You will also feel like you're part of a community, that you align in the mindset. Think about political movements, think about religious organizations. They all have a narrative. And now in business, it's fairly new. We're discovering, maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago, we started discovering that we can also operate at that level, that there is a spiritual element to it, that it's not because we're just going to dictate and write everything down and document all our processes that the company is going to be fixed. We have to infuse a narrative that people really can connect with. So that's the number one mistake, Nathan, is to try to stay too tangible. You have to let go a little bit and trust that this is also going to be something that happens over time, through moments that you could not expect. Just like jazz, it will be in the now moment. If we have one more minute, I have one more mistakes that I often see is, like I said before, people want to hone in one story, and that's because we've been educated, to say, I want to tell my story. And it's fine. In the moment, you probably have a few, like I know, Nathan, you do a lot of great work with entrepreneurs and you teach them how to be very succinct and win pitch competitions and so on. And yeah, you've got 5 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe you can only share one story really in that moment. But keep in mind that your narrative is that system of stories, that you have to be always able to connect them. So don't think it's a one and done 2-slide thing. It's a system that you have to build over time.
Wow.
Nice.
Guillaume, you are such a fascinating individual. I want to ask you one last question. We have about 2 minutes to answer that. And that is, when you were a kid, what was your dream job and how does that now reflect in what you're doing today?
I had many dream jobs. I wanted to be a sailor.
Okay.
I fell in love with sailing very, very quickly. And it was also in the 70s where sailing for a profession had just started. There's the famous British and French sailors and American sailor. They were starting to be popularized by books and magazines. And I thought, I want to do this one day, but I had no clue. And then I was too curious and I branched out to so many other fields. But that's what I wanted to do, be that feeling of freedom and independence and just, run my own ship.
Oh, I love it. And you certainly do that today. You have the freedom. You're living in a different country, so that urge to travel has been satisfied. Absolutely. Yeah. It's actually fascinating always, right? When we look back into our childhood and how some components of that are still reflected in our lives today.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the narrative, right? It's what we dream of doing is one of the stories we can recount, and that's part of who we become and our narrative in the future.
Indeed. So, Guillaume, thank you very much for being a guest on our show here today. Our audience, if you want to get in touch with Guillaume Wiatr, then visit MetaHelm.com and get in touch with him this way, or check the comment in this YouTube video. There are the links to get in touch with Guillaume, Nathan, and me as well. And with that, I want to thank Nathan, of course. Thank you for being here as well, making this interesting. Guillaume, absolutely great. And of course, all of our live viewers and anybody who watches this on replay. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. And we shall see each other again next week. Bye. Let's stay on for just a second. Okay, because that will allow me to paste in some YouTube recommendations at the end of this. All right, and we are out.